And good evening, everybody. This is Nightlight, and I'm Barb DeLong, your host. I invite you to step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. Nightlight. A reminder that you are never alone. I'm very excited about my guest tonight. Brad Olsen, author of the Esoteric Series, joins Nightlight tonight to help awaken those areas within that have become dormant over time. This is a series of books that examines the flaws in modern history and looks at how conspiracy theories, esoteric knowledge, and fringe subjects can be used to help change the dead-end course humanity seems to be following. Brad explores the long and storied alternative narrative of life on this planet as we know as Big Brother is here in the form of the New World Order and how they keep the knowledge of humankind's true nature from the mass population. And finally, he looks at all the ways humans are evolving to achieve their full potential. Not a small feat. Welcome to the show, Brad.
Hi, Barbara. It's great to be here. Nice to speak with you.
Oh, well, I'm delighted you could be here tonight. I have had an amazing time reading your two books. I've read Modern Esoteric and Future Esoteric, and I know that somewhere down the line there may be a third one, but these two are just amazing. And I checked out one of your travel books as well. You've come a long way. You started with travel books, and then you went into the spiritual and metaphysical features and aspects in all over the world. Actually, there's one for the USA, and there are others as well. And I find it fascinating how you have evolved over time, and how your approach to the writing has evolved tremendously. And I have to ask you, every author I've ever spoken to has had a calling of some sort, and to write, to share, to express their thoughts and philosophies. And over the years, I can see how you are writing and the manner in which you are presenting material and the spirituality and the depth of perception that you have put into your books has absolutely just exploded, literally. Was there something that triggered you into writing? Was there something that happened to you at some point in time that compelled you to put words down on paper and share with other people?
Well, thank you for such kind words. And yes, indeed, there was. I was fortunate enough to have created my own trip around the world in the early 1990s. And that led to my first book called World Stompers, a Global Travel Manifesto, which is still in print and still get letters every now and again from readers who said they read it and then planned and executed their own trip around the world, or not necessarily always around the world, but somewhere exotic to get a new perspective on life. And certainly when I traveled around the world for 3 years, it was one of the greatest learning experiences a young man could ever experience. And I guess my epiphany moment occurred on top of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. Of course, you're not allowed to climb there, but call it youthful indiscretion. I did it anyways on the full moon in March 1993. And things just kind of came together for me. And I realized that the path I wanted to take when I got back into the United States was to start this writing career and get my first book launched. And I did. And that led to other book projects, and it led to a distribution deal. And things just kind of did the domino effect and opened new doors. And now I'm on television and my books are reaching a wider audience. And if you would ask me back then if I thought it would all come to this, I would have said, well, it would be great if it did, but it seems like kind of a dream. So it's been a dream come true, I have to say.
Well, you're one of the few people. Often when I'm working with people, I'll say to them, "What do you want to be if you grow up?" And and it feels to me as though you have cornered the market to a certain degree for yourself, especially on the fact that you have followed your passions. And in following your passions, the world opens up to you, and spirit always just keeps dumping things in your lap because you're going with the flow. And I'm so deeply impressed by how the manner in which you write has your writing voice has changed from when you started out to when you did the spiritual places in the United States and stuff like that. And what I loved about the spiritual sites, you explained each of them. You gave some of the spiritual background to them. And for heaven's sakes, you even gave driving directions, which I thought was fabulous. The only thing you missed out on was motels and where to go to the bathroom. And and it was really amazing. And then you totally did not a U-turn, but you stepped it up unbelievably by going into the Esoteric Series. And what was it that said to you, now I will first of all, I have to tell everybody, if you want to have two books that will tell you a little bit about everything metaphysical, these are the two books to get. And they are masterfully written as only a teacher can write, because he gives you a ton of information, but not so much that you're satisfied, so that you have to then, grit your teeth and say, well, damn, where does it go from there? And it sends you on your own journey of exploration, which I don't know if you intentionally did, but I must tell you, every master teacher I have ever known had this skill, this talent, this gift that gave it. You hook everybody in, and then you go on to the next topic, and it's like, wait a minute, you're not finished. And I think I cursed you a number of times before I realized what you were doing, and just sat down and appreciated what it was you were doing and didn't get caught up in it, because if I had stopped every time you frustrated me into wanting more, I never would have finished the first book.
And they probably could have each been 200-300 pages longer, but I didn't want to do that to you either. But half of my lifetime ago, I was an English teacher in Japan, and I was pretty much fresh out of college. I'd done my first backpacking trip through Europe, came back to the States, moved to Hawaii, broke up with a girlfriend, and then got some great advice to go to Japan and be an English teacher. And I thought it was just a job, but it was explained to me that the Japanese and most people in the Far East really hold a high reverence for teachers. They call them
Mm-hmm.
senseis. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but it was explained to me, and I certainly know it now, that teaching is one of those professions that is really up there with a surgeon or someone who imparts wisdom in different ways. And it really is this good karma that comes with it. And that's how it was explained to me, that you also have a responsibility when you become a teacher. And this is true with all the teachers from preschool all the way up to university and graduate degree, that when you do that, you're imparting your knowledge. So it was explained to me that you're giving a part of yourself to your students, you're helping them grow, you're helping them learn and become better people. And anytime you do that in life, it's a really good thing.
Oh, absolutely. I spent 25 years in the classroom and teaching, not learning, teaching. and you're absolutely right. It's a joyful experience because it's absolutely the fact that you're imparting knowledge, but you're learning from everybody you're teaching as well. And I don't think I have ever had an experience where someone had asked for information that I didn't learn from them as well, and feel like there was a great richness that I had been given. And I always hope that what I have shared, is in equal measure, hopefully, maybe. But the one thing, now I've used the term esoteric a lot, and because I'm in the field and because, I know what the term means, I'm very familiar with what you're talking about, but you want to explain just what the word esoteric means to everybody so they know what area of this we're going into?
Sure. Well, of course, some people might associate the term with a cult, and a cult just means hidden. And that is similar to what esoteric means. It means it's a select genre that is selected by a few people. Because when this kind of esoteric knowledge, say, for example, the concept of the earth being round, when we went from flat earth to round earth, that became exoteric. That means everybody suddenly knows that the earth is round. Well, it's funny that now there's some people that saying we're flat earth again, but I'm not buying that.
No.
And anyways, so this is information that's sought out by a select few. And I realize my books are pretty deep and dense with this kind of wisdom and knowledge. And it's not going to appeal to the mass reader, but it will appeal to those people who realize that there's a lot more to this world than we're being told. And that's the phrase I coined called the alternative narrative, that there's another storyline that superimposes upon the regular storyline that we've been taught through our upbringing, our indoctrination through school, through the mass media, from what the government tells us. I think most of your listeners will realize that there's a lot more to it. And UFOs is a great example. Millions of people have had sightings worldwide, yet it's not recognized. And that's why in the book Future Esoteric, I've included all those things in the paranormal, in the future tense, that someday we're going to have this kind of disclosure where UFO studies will become the exoteric. And when that happens, it's going to just transform humanity. In fact, it'll be such a transformation. I think it'll be like we're going to start at year zero again. Post-disclosure will just open so many doors and change humanity in so many different ways. It's a great time to be alive, to be able to witness it.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree with you. And you have used the term in some of the interviews that I've listened to of awakening. And I would agree that humanity as a whole, and really even more specifically and more intently here in the U.S., that there is an awakening going on in the consciousness of everyone. And depending on where they are consciously, it's either more or even greater than it was before. Not only understanding that there is so much more out there, but in many ways that so much has been hidden from us. And people are thirsty and hungry for for wisdom and information. And I sometimes, no, I lots of times I have the feeling that what we are, kind of tagging into and hooking onto is the fact that we carry all of this information inside of us, and we've forgotten it. And so we're remembering that there's something we forgot, and we go looking for it. And so often we go looking outside of ourselves instead of looking inside of ourselves. But 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 a lot of this ancient wisdom, ancient knowledge, and I'm talking ancient, not just, the pyramids, but beyond that, more back to the very beginnings of when we became a consciousness, that all of that information is there, and that we're striving to reach for it. And society today, especially in this country, has been prevented from remembering on purpose.
Yeah.
And
that's no accident.
I know. And so I'm going to skip back and forth between the two books. The first book in the series is Modern Esoterica, but Future Esoterica was published first, right?
Right, only because I had more information ready to go.
Okay.
But really, Modern Esoterica is book one in the series.
Okay, and Future Esoteric is coming out again.
Just did in the second edition, so I had more photos, some more information to put in there. Did a complete re-edit, so all the information that had been current events has been updated. So that book just came out April 1st.
Now, everyone should read them. I mean, it does you do an amazing job of going through, from the very beginning up to present times. And one of the things that you speak of, the shadow government, and want to explain what that is? Sure.
Well, we've all heard such things as the black budget, the 2.3 trillion that went missing the day before 9/11.
Yes.
They just made another announcement a few months ago of another 8-point-something trillion that went missing. Well, these are going into the black budget. And the only way to really quantify where this money goes is they're going into these special access projects, SAPS. And several of these are out of the purview of Congress, certainly out of the notice of the public. And they're things such as the underground bases and the secret space program, which has been ongoing now for several decades. And this is using the backward engineered technology that has been acquired from down crafts, as well as other means, such as there has been communication with ET groups. And they're here right now on this planet, up above us, observing most of them, but some are also hands-on. And so there's still this paranoia that goes back to like the Cold War era, that we have to outdo each other on this planet. I think you and I know that all of us are one, and until we start to realize that, these things are just going to fall the wayside. There is no us and them. It's just all of us together. But that's just us saying that. It's not what these people in this secret government are up to. And so the reason I put this in the book, one, it is an esoteric subject when you think about the things that I just mentioned. But I think more importantly is we have a right to know about these things. And if we're not going to get this information through the regular channels of information distribution, well, I take it upon myself, and I hope others will take it upon themselves to do some research, to look into this. And what they're going to find is this big, shadowy, dark, secret government that's lurking behind the scenes for just about every big decision and change that's going on in the world today.
Now, is this a shadow government for the world or just the United States?
Well, it's certainly here in the U.S., but I would say that now it's gone global. because it's really not the government anymore. It's somewhat disingenuous to blame it all on the government. The government is just merely a tool. The government is also taking its orders from higher powers. And now what we have are these supranational corporations, these worldwide international corporations, which are creating a foothold just about everywhere on this planet. And it's ruled by this concept of fiat currency, which in this country are the Federal Reserve notes, which are based on nothing at all except our perception that they have value. And it's pretty much an endless supply. So they're able to do what they want. So a lot of the aerospace companies, which have acquired much of this backward engineering technology, they're making their decisions behind closed doors. They're really not accountable to anyone. You could say perhaps they're stockholders, but if you're a big investor in, say, Lockheed Martin or Boeing, well, you know, you're in on it too. And they're making good money on it. So as long as they're getting their dividends and other paybacks, then they're probably not going to question too much.
Now, this organization different from, this organization has the Majestic 12 involved with it, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so what about the bloodline, the 13 families, what is it, 13 families in the bloodline? Now, is that a different group that's, or is it the same, or do they have dual membership?
I would say they're probably the same. And you could say that there are some here in the West, there are some in Europe, and there could be some in worldwide. But in Future Esoteric, I did that. I recapped that study that was done by these Swiss researchers that basically followed the money.
Okay.
And it basically goes to go ahead.
No, I was looking, it's the 1% I'm talking about, the Rothschilds and the Roosevelts and the Bushes and that group of people. Still there? Did I lose Brad? Did I lose Sean? Did you guys lose me? I think we all got lost. Well, I'm going to keep talking because there's nothing worse than dead air. Hopefully Sean is out there someplace trying to find me. I'm looking for this group of people that are so wealthy and rich that they are above everyone and everything. Hi, Sean, are you there?
Yes, Barbara, I'm here. I'm trying to reconnect with Brad right now.
Oh, okay. Then I just wanted to make sure I wasn't just talking to the cat. So in Brad's books, he goes into so many topics that it's the most fascinating thing I have ever seen. And he goes into, and I'm going to get him to talk in the second hour about the different alien groups, because there's so many that I just was not even aware of, that fascinated me. It was not just the Greys and the reptilians, but it was different levels of aliens. And I think what boggled my mind was that in many ways the Earth plane is kind of like a playground for these different races of species of alien entities. And it appears that they have contracts with our government or the world, and that there have been times when there have actually been battles amongst the different groups of aliens that have taken place beneath the surface of the Earth, where theoretically there are bases of all sorts that they are living in that are environmentally appropriate for their species. I have to admit I was fascinated with the fact that there are so many underground bases in this country. I don't doubt it. I just was surprised that there was material out there that would support that kind of a statement. The research that he has done into these books is mind-boggling. And as soon as we get him back on, I want to talk to him about the bloodlines as well, because
I'm here, Barbara.
oh, hi. Oh, great.
Hello.
Here I'm
This
giving
happens to me a lot. When I
Does it
start
really?
talking about these, oh yeah, almost every interview I do gets cut off for some mysterious
Well,
reason.
that's okay, because I did my research. No, I can't do your half of the interview, but I can ask intelligent questions. So we were talking about this 1% group, which is the Rothschilds and the Roosevelts. And my question for you on this, as well as shadow government, I know that the Rothschilds' money goes way back. It almost goes back to Templar time, doesn't it?
Well, the funny thing about Rothschilds, or I mean the Rockefellers, is the father to John D. He was like a snake oil salesman. People would nickname him the devil. And if we're talking about these bloodline families and the possibility of them having some reptilian blood, well, that kind of makes sense. The Rockefellers don't go as far back as the Rothschilds do. They go all the way back several hundred years, when they rose to popularity around the time of Adam Weishaupt in 1776, when he formulated the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati. And the only reason we know so much about the Bavarian Illuminati is one of their couriers was passing some messages along by horseback, and the horseback rider was struck by lightning and killed, yet all the documents were found on his person. So we know that they've been scheming and manipulating and working in these closed secret society systems for hundreds of years, but I would propose it goes back even further than that. I think it goes even as far back as Babylon. And that's when we have the creation of the Babylon money magic, this whole concept of creating this fiat currency to control people with.
Okay, yeah, that was my curiosity was, okay, Rothschilds, Roosevelts, Bushes, Kissinger, all of these guys, I mean, they are current, and yet the star people, the extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them, have been here since the beginning of time. And not just as UFOs, they've been on the planet and in the planet since then.
They have.
So was it the fact that the human population wasn't intelligent or evolved enough to be able to be manipulated? How did this start? I know that Eisenhower supposedly made a contract with the extraterrestrials for the reverse engineering and stuff like that, but was it our entrance? It wasn't our entrance into the space age that brought them into a greater synchronicity with us. They've been here for thousands of years.
Well, they have. And it could be that they've just been working with the top bloodline families as they have existed throughout the ages. Because the Greada Treaty and Eisenhower's relationship with them has just been in the last century.
Yeah.
But this goes way, way back, as you mentioned, and as well as their presence here on Earth, mainly underground, of course, out of sight, but still ruling the planet the way they see fit. And that is why so many things have gone awry on this world. It's not the human agenda. There is an ET agenda. And you could say that the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds are like the captains and the majors, and the real generals are these creatures that are calling the shots from down below. Whereas these bloodline families, they're enriched, they're very powerful, they do a lot of the controlling, but they're also getting their orders too.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so now we've got these 13 bloodlines. Where do they go back to?
Well, they go back to as far back as ancient Egypt. Let's keep in mind that the pharaohs were considered living gods, right?
Yep.
And then the Caesars were also considered living gods. So the rulers of ancient Egypt, which parlayed into ancient Rome, were these living gods. And now we have a pope who sits in Rome, who is the earpiece to the gods above. And we still offer this person so much reverence that he's supposed to be.
Brad went away again. Yes, the Pope is supposed to be God's representative here on the earth plane. And well, yeah, that's what he's elected to. But, you know, he is, after all, human as well. When Brad does come back, I do want to talk about the bloodlines, because the bloodlines do go back. They go way back. And it's my understanding, and of course he will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll speak for him since he's not here right now, that the bloodlines are engineered lines, genetically speaking. And these bloodlines they marry true. They hold to their bloodlines. They do not marry out of their bloodlines. They keep themselves as pure as they can, because the control is in the blood. And it's a matter of fact that the bloodlines of these families is slightly different from the rest of the population, and it has to do with the Rh negative gene. And so that there is, and this is where I kind of got the feeling that at some point in time, our DNA had, not our, but the DNA of a select few had been altered or tampered with, so that there is a greater connection to the ETs. And, you know, we've all, you know, almost all of us have figured out that Darwin wasn't right, that we didn't really come from the apes, and yet they haven't been able to find that missing link. And you know, I don't think there is a missing link. I think the absolute fact is that we did not come from the apes, though there are similarities, but that at some point in time, there has been a manipulation. Is Brad back?
Yeah.
Okay. Stop me. I'm going into the bloodlines.
I heard most of what you said.
Okay.
Yes.
And I figured I heard you breathe. You have to stop me when I'm covering for you, because I'm talking for you, and that's not appropriate.
It's okay.
I did do my homework. I'm really glad I did now. So explain to us about the bloodlines. It was my understanding that at some point in the early time that a few or a significant number of people, their DNA was worked with, changed somehow, and that's where the Rh negative factor came in.
That's correct. And there is a link to the primates, and that is what RH stands for the rhesus monkeys. It's an abbreviation. And 85% of humans on this planet are Rh positive. That means there is a little bit of this primate blood which is in us. But there are also 15% of us that do not have the Rh factor in our blood, including my own family. And here's what's so strange about it, Barbara. Humans are the only animal species on this planet Earth where a mother can taint its own offspring and kill it by mixing blood. This is what's so strange. It happens in no other animal except humans. And this was the case with my Uncle Douglas, who died 5 days after being born, because during birth, his blood mixed with my grandmother's blood, and it killed him. He was what was known as a blue baby, because all the antigen in his body were attacking this blood, this foreign blood that was basically treated as some kind of infection that was going to kill the host. And indeed, it did. And my Aunt Diane was one of the first survivors as a blue baby to get a full blood transfusion. So she was born with Rh positive blood. To this day, she's Rh negative, but she's had health problems ever since. So the point is, there are two kinds of human beings among us. We're mostly compatible. Most of the time, even a Rh negative mother, there are shots you can get now to prevent a blue baby phenomenon. But the fact remains that there are these differences among us. And if you look deeper into it, the mystery just gets more and more interesting, such as there are very few Rh negative Asians or Africans. I think it's only like 1%. But there's a huge amount in certain parts of Europe, such as the Celtic countries, and more specifically, the Basque countries, where you have multicolored eyes, red and blonde hair, and almost always white-skinned people. Well, Edgar Cayce said that the survivors of Atlantis went to this region of the Pyrenees between Spain and France. This is the Basque region. So that would kind of make sense, that these were the survivors of Atlantis who were not descendant from apes and had no Rh negative blood in them, but had intermingled and intermixed. So I think what we're going to find, and I do have chapters on DNA mysteries in modern esoteric, as well as a chapter called Blood of the Gods that explains a lot of this. What we're going to find in the future is that humans are just like this genetic masterpiece of a whole bunch of different species mixed into one. There was a news story just last week saying that the Neanderthal DNA is still prevalent. And we have the reptilian brain in the back of our head. That's part of our brain is this fight or flight mechanism that will quickly get us out of a situation, or if we're backed into a corner, we'll pump up our adrenaline and have to fight to survive. So
I don't know if he's got Is he there, Sean?
So it's interesting. But I think what we're going to find is that we have not only some indigenous in us that traces back to the apes, but also some extraterrestrial and even reptile.
Well, I think even above that, because the giants who were obviously on this planet as well, you still there? Okay, the giants that at some point in time were all over the planet, they had a lot of physical features that were very common to all of them. Even you go back to the Bible, and the giants in the Bible, they were described as fair-skinned with red or blonde hair, with double rows of teeth, and with extra digits on their fingers and their toes. They have discovered giant skeletons all over the U.S., all over the world, actually. And they have had the double rows of teeth and the extra digits. And what I find fascinating is that DNA component, whatever it is, I have a friend who everyone in her family has been born with extra digits and double rows of teeth, so that even the giant aspects are incorporated into who we are today. It's recessive in some, and it's not recessive in others.
Yeah, and just like with Rh negative people, they sometimes are born with an extra digit in their spine, like an extra tailbone at the bottom. Sometimes even with another little small rib. Rh negative people are the most popular type of people to be abducted. They also cannot be cloned, and they're more prone to psychic phenomenon, as well as being able to astral travel and clairvoyancy. Many of these, what we would call superhuman abilities, come quite naturally to Rh negative people, which makes this subspecies of human even more interesting.
Now, are you saying that the Rothschilds, the Roosevelts, the Bushes, that they are primarily Rh negative people?
Correct. And they always interbreed. You cannot fall in love with a Rothschild daughter and expect to marry into that family and have children. They very much select only other bloodline people to be involved in their families. They're very, very serious about this.
Well, and you know, while there may be only 13 bloodlines, there could be thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that so they almost have to have a blood test before they'll let somebody get married, basically.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I know that this group of people operate above the law and have absolutely no desire to even, you know, be sullied by it. They control what is fascinating is they control so much that it is almost frightening. And I'm going to wait till Brad comes back again. He seems to be in and out here this evening. They control newspapers. They control the oil. They control the gas. They control Monsanto. They control the space program. They control so much that the rest of us just you know, don't seem to count, and it's a little bit frightening. I've often said to people that those of us that are just normal here and trying to survive on the planet and have good, rich lives, and not necessarily monetarily rich, just spiritually rich and happy. We're sort of like pawns on a game board, involved in a game, and we don't know what the rules are. We don't have the faintest idea what it is that's going on around us that we are a part of, and that we're being manipulated, and we don't know who's manipulating us or why. And you know, it does come down to, is it world domination? Do they want to control the world? And if they do they want to control the world in a good way? And I guess controlling the world, it can't be in a good way, because that means it's taken away our free will, and we have to maintain our free will, or we're just dominoes. We're just pieces of a puzzle in a game. But we're more than that. And those that you know have eyes to see and ears to hear, so to speak, are obligated in many ways to be aware of what's going on, of even though you don't know all the answers, knowing that it's important that you question things, knowing that it's important that you challenge things. Sean, are you calling him?
Hi. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hello.
Hi there.
Are
Sorry
you back?
about, yeah, I'm back.
That's okay. I'm really good at improv. So I was going into the fact that these families, these powerful people,
Yeah.
are they okay, you have to look at them and say, well, what is it you want? You have so much.
Right.
What is it that you want? And I was saying, I said earlier that it makes me feel as though I am a piece in a game on a game board, and I don't know what the game is.
Well, you are, and you're not supposed to know the rules or how to win or get out of it. And what their motivation is world control. And that's exactly what they spell out in the New World Order. So, I mean, this is where it gets really dark. And then when you also consider their workings and machinations with the occult and in secret societies and magic, and even religion, that this goes real deep, and this is how it ties in with these malevolent ETs that have been here on this planet for over 7,000 years. And these are the Draco Reptilian ETs, and sooner or later we're going to have to come to grips with the fact that they've been here for a long time. They consider themselves of Earth too. So they're exempt from the whole concept of free will, that they're here too, that they can impose their will because they were born here on this planet, underground, but still on this planet. And it's this whole concept that goes back to the Star Trek show called the Prime Directive, that was where the Enterprise was not allowed to meddle in any evolving species. And that happens to be a real universal law. However, since they're born here, since they live here, and since they've been in control for so long, they're very reluctant to give up on that control. And so they've used these bloodline families to do their bidding, and they will, once a person has committed to working with them, this is where, in my book Future Esoteric, in the conclusion, I draw the conclusion that Satan and Lucifer and the devil are really these Draco ETs, and they're little helpers down there in the fiery inferno are the Greys doing the abductions, cattle mutilations, and the people who decide to work with them really do sell their souls out to the devil. And they're making a huge mistake, not only to themselves karmically, but they're selling out the human race. And even though they may get all of their heart's desire in their lifetime, from wealth to the opposite sex or whatever their orientation is, sometimes little children, to the kind of power that we could only dream of, if that's the kind of dreams that you have, they'll get all that. Because what will happen is, and in my capacity as a publisher, Barbara, I also publish Leo Lion-Zagami's books, and he has a three-part series called Confessions of an Illuminati. And he spells out in no uncertain terms that they do these rituals, that they do sacrifice children and other people. And it is a blood cult. And it is to gain power. So when they do this, they are then shadowed. This is the term for it. And one of these malevolent ETs in fourth dimension, and this is where it gets pretty complicated, but scientists have already determined there's at least 13 dimensions right here, right now, amongst all of us. We can only perceive ourselves here in the third, and sometimes little glimpses into the fourth. But these Draco ETs are very much fourth dimensional beings, so they can shadow people and do their bidding for them if they sell out to help this regressive ET agenda progress. But now that people are waking up, it's not so easy for them to do this anymore.
Well, I just, when you were talking, it just threw me back to King Solomon and how he had a ring that the gods had given him so that he could control the demons to build his temple.
That's right. I also published a book by Lon Milo Duquette called The Key to Solomon's Key. And the second half of the book are all these sigils, which are symbols and chants that somebody can do to invite some of these spirits into their lives to help them do their bidding. And when they do that, again, they're making a big mistake, because not only are they affecting their own personal karma, but they're also going to be harming other people by doing so. And then the other thing is, they can be very difficult to get rid of. You may not want them around you all the time, and they can be sometimes quite mischievous. So the thing is, I grew up an atheist, Barbara. I wouldn't have believed any of this stuff 10 years ago. But working on these books and working with these authors and getting to understand what these guys have been through and seen and done, I realize it's a very complex universe out there, especially when you factor in all these dimensions.
Yeah, and you know,
ahead.
the thing that I keep coming up against, and Patrick was a biblical theologian, so he was very stuck in the Bible and all of that stuff. And what I'm coming to realize, at least for me, and I have to preface this with, this is my opinion for right now. Tomorrow it may be different, but this is my opinion for right now, that religion as we know it is only for this planet. Yeah. And that spirituality goes beyond religion. It isn't instead of, it just stretches beyond it. That religion is another form of control. And you spoke about 3 different power centers, organizations. You spoke about the Vatican,
yeah.
London City
of London, and Washington, D.C.
And Washington. Want to explain about that? That was kind of cool.
Yeah, well, this is what's called the Empire of 3 Cities. And what you have to realize is all 3 of these places, the 1 square mile city of London is the financial control, and it is outside the purview of this greater city of London, and the United Kingdom is its own city-state. Same within Washington, D.C. It's not a state, it's its own entity, and Washington, D.C. is in charge of military power to enforce their will in creating this new world order. And of course, the Vatican is its own separate city-state within the city of Rome, within the country of Italy, but it's not beholden to the laws of Italy nor the city of Rome. It's its own entity with its own ambassadors and its own consulates around the world. You might ask, what does the Vatican have to do with the policies of other countries? Well, they have a lot to do with it, because the actual literal translation of the word Catholic means universal. And let's not be fooled. Their goal is a one world religion. And in fact, Leo Lion-Zagami has spelled out very clearly in his book, Pope Francis, the Last Pope, published by CCC Publishing, that they are indeed well on their way into launching a one world religion. And they're building another temple in the city of Rome, which of course will have the diplomatic immunity such as the Vatican. But more importantly, there's a city in the country called Kazakhstan. It's a city called Astana, and it is what CNN describes as the weirdest city in the world, because it has all these religious symbols of all the world's religions. It has a pyramid, it has obelisks, and this is where the leaders of most of the world religions are now convening every year, and they're talking about this kind of thing. And if you look carefully at what's going on in the Vatican, some very strange things are happening, such as the Pope is inviting Muslim imams to come into St. Peter's Basilica and pray towards Mecca. This has never happened before. Why is it happening now? Because they're setting the stage for some kind of event, perhaps a Project Bluebeam, holographic hallucination in the sky, to get us all believe that some savior is coming down here to save Earth. And I'm here to tell you, before it happens, when it happens, it's fake. So don't fall for it.
Is this one of those? Is this another one of those false flag things?
Well, it goes beyond a false flag, because false flag is blaming someone else for a tragedy that you create. This is getting us into the mindset that we have to bow down to a worldwide authority that is not only going to be those 3 things: the financial control over the world, not just the Western countries, the whole world, the military might. America's still got the biggest army, but they are now being challenged by Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
So there are cracks forming in their plan. They are behind schedule, but they're certainly going to try it before the time is out. And we've heard of this guy, Benjamin Creme, who goes around talking about the return of Maitreya.
Yeah.
Well, it's fake. And this is what they're going to say, is that this world leader is here to save the day and eradicate poverty. And it'll all sound so flowery and bright and beautiful, but it's just a scam to get us all on board.
I heard him talk 30 years ago, and it was going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
And tomorrow never came.
No.
No, there are always going to be guys like that. But what's horrifying is for every 30 or 40 of these delusional fakes, there's one real one. And how do you tell the difference? I think one of the things that has frustrated me terribly over the last couple of years, knowing that those that are in power control all of the television stations. They control the radio. They control the newspapers. They control the scientists are no longer allowed to discover things that will help humanity.
Right.
So who do you trust, and where do you go to for the truth?
Well, it may sound counterintuitive for those of a scientific mind, but I think in the end, we just have to trust ourselves. We have to trust our intuition to just get that gut feeling to tell us what's right and what's wrong in some instances. I mean, of course, we all want to believe science is the right way and that science can help us understand some complex issues.
We're taking a short break. We're back, Brad. I sure hope you're there.
I sure am.
Okay. You seem to slip in and out here. It's almost like it's a dimensional shift you're going through.
Every time I talk about the bloodline families and reptilians among us, something always happens with the line.
Well, before we even get into more of this stuff, which I want to do, I do want to mention again that Future Esoteric is being released again. It is an updated version, and that there's a lot more material in it. So those who bought the first book have to buy the second book to get the new material. But they can also, and I want to give out your website. You want to give it out.
CCC Publishing, that's 3Cs Publishing, one word, .com, to check out all the books, including Leo Zagami titles and Lon Milo Duquette's titles and all of my books. And if you order through the website, which is priced a little bit lower than Amazon, well, you also get a signed book in the mail if they're coming from me. So that's a plus. And if you just want to learn more about me and what I'm up to, bradolsen.com. That's BRADOLSEN.com. And I'm also the event producer of a big event here in San Francisco called the How Weird Street Fair, which is coming up in 20 days on Sunday, May 1st at Howard and 2nd Street, downtown San Francisco. 13 stages and 25,000 people dancing in the street in costumes, a whole lot of fun. I'll be working all day, but come and have a good time.
This started as a very small little event a number of years ago, I see.
Yeah, everything starts small, Barbara, and just gets bigger and bigger, more complex.
It sounds like it's gotten overwhelmingly wonderful, and what's phenomenal about it is that it is. I've seen pictures of it, and it's an absolutely joyful event. It's a celebration.
Yes, it is. Celebration of peace and dancing and coming together, and my job is to put a smile on the face of 25,000 people. And I also have the great honor and distinction of being the poster designer every year. As in my capacity as a graphic illustrator, I draw the poster every year and work with a computer artist and art direct it. And this year the theme is the Cosmic Stew. We have like a Michelangelo alien stirring the pot of humanity with all the symbols and religions in the bowl, which is really the earth.
Well, that's exactly what we are,
Yeah.
and what I find fascinating, and I'll sink back into future esoterica here, or no, I can't remember which book it was in there. They're both together as far as I'm concerned here. You go into a lot of explanation of UFOs and reverse engineering, and I have found that those who have seen UFOs can't get them out of their system.
Well, how could you?
Well, no, one landed on my campus when I was in college.
Wow.
And I saw it when it took off. It went right over the dorm. It blanked out the sky. I was probably, I'm terrible with distances. But I was no more than 200 feet from it.
Wow.
And it hovered for a split second, and then it went, and it was gone. And the thing that amazed me, the whole thing amazed me. But what, in retrospect, I look back on, I realized that there was no air displacement when it went, and it was huge. It should have sucked air all over the place, but no air displacement, no noise, and no sonic boom. And it was the most amazing thing I have ever seen. It's what woke me up that we are not alone. It's what put me on this pathway that I've been on forever. And it didn't frighten me. It was kind of like, wow. And I know you've seen one. You want to share your experience?
Well, it wasn't actually a UFO. It was light phenomenon over Crater Lake, and this was July 1997. And in fact, in a couple weeks, I'm being flown up there to recreate this sighting at Crater Lake for the TV show Mysteries of the National Parks on the Travel Channel. I just came back from New Mexico doing a Chaco Canyon episode, and in this case, they want me to come up to Crater Lake and go to the exact spot where I saw this light phenomenon. And it was basically, it was just right after sunset, so it's still pretty light out. And I witnessed it with a couple other guys I was camping with. And there was no starting point. It just appeared in the sky, and it was a straight white light streaking across the sky. It was no comet. It was more like a laser beam. And it broke off into perfectly square blips. I still can't quite figure out why, but it was aiming straight towards the depths of the lake. So it appeared out of nowhere, and it disappeared out of nowhere. But it was definitely aiming right into the depths of one of the deepest lakes in North America. So myself and these other guys, we just fell to the ground laughing, just couldn't believe what we saw. We all, later on that night, talked about it, and we all described it exactly the same way. But what was so amazing is we start running up the hill because we were camping in the highest point at Crater Lake, which again is illegal, but youthful indiscretion. And we saw it again over Mount Shasta, about 30 miles to the south. It was amazing, the exact same light phenomenon. And this streak of white light was going right into Mount Shasta. I was just so curious as to what this could have been. And of course, you can't really ask someone or find the kind of information, and the internet was very young back then. So this really set me on my path to understand UFO and ET phenomenon and their interaction, the exopolitics with them in this world. And in fact, I write about it in the introductory chapters of Future Esoteric. So it was the kind of thing where I would have loved to have gotten an explanation on this Of course, I didn't, but then I realized later on, I found out that most UFO sightings happen to be above or around volcanoes.
Mm-hmm.
And the volcano just outside of Mexico City has had so many sightings. Literally millions of people have witnessed UFO phenomenon in Mexico over this volcano. And the reasoning is that it could be because there are hollow cavities beneath volcanoes, that perhaps they're able to transition through matter and hide in volcanoes. Perhaps they're using them as an energy source. And in the case of Mount Shasta, there is a rumored underground extraterrestrial city called Telos that is supposed to have been there for many, many thousands of years. And indeed, there are so many strange phenomena that occur around Mount Shasta. Not only in my book, Sacred Places North America, do I describe some of these mound sites, but also quite a few of these what are called lenticular clouds. And those are the clouds that are shaped like UFOs, which may exactly be like cloaking devices. Some friends of mine who live up there tell me they see these clouds come in from the west, and most of our weather in California comes from the ocean out west. But then sometimes these lenticular clouds will just go back the way they came, even against the wind. So it's really strange, all the phenomenon that one can see up there at Mount Shasta area.
But it really is interesting for the most part, with the exception of, well, there are probably a lot of them, but the two that come to mind, initially is Phoenix Lights, and that particular occurrence had thousands and thousands of people that saw the Phoenix Lights.
Right.
And then the other is, which the one that I love, is the Battle of Los Angeles in World War II,
Yep.
where we attacked it, and there was even collateral damage. There were deaths that were reported because the bombs and the missiles that were shot at those I don't know if it was more than one, but they bounced off and they peppered Los Angeles with shrapnel.
Yeah, I have a picture of it in Future Esoteric.
I was fortunate to interview a man who was a child at the time.
Oh, wow.
And he lived near the beach, and when the sirens went off and everything, his mother, pulled him inside and shoved him in a closet and stuff, and he crept out and he watched it. And after the all clear, he and his friends went out to the beach and picked up the shrapnel, and the Army paid them for all of the shrapnel that they picked up.
Wow.
But he was an amazing man. But I digress. That usually people who see UFOs, it's not like usually large groups. It's usually very small groups of people. And again, that term for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, I'm wondering if there are some people who are just tuned in and aware so that they see something, as opposed to others who just aren't there on a consciousness level. And this is in no way judgment of somebody's level of consciousness. It's just that maybe that door wasn't open at that moment in time.
There's the story of Columbus and the first sailors who came to the Caribbean islands, and when their boat was offshore, Hispaniola, that the Indians claimed that they couldn't see the ship, that they didn't know what it was, so they didn't see it. And that could be true with the UFO phenomenon today, when there are things that are totally inexplicable. Maybe we don't see it, or only those people with eyes to see and ears to hear can perceive it. And it turned out that my experience at Crater Lake, 3 of us saw it, 3 of us did not, nor did they see the one over Mount Shasta a few minutes later. So the 3 of us that did see it saw them both, but the other ones that didn't see it missed them both.
That's fascinating. You know that Columbus saw a glowing light under the sea that came up out of the sea, and it's in his diaries.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
His logs. He also captured a giant and was trying to take it back with him, but the giant jumped overboard and swam to shore. So, but yeah, no, it's the UFO sighting that is definitely in his logs, and so that at least back then they were under the water as well. I think what fascinates me the most, not that they're UFOs and ETs, because yeah, of course. In this country, though, our government seems to deny it, but it's definitely a reality. And you speak of how there have actually been wars between the different factions of the ETs underground.
Right. Well, that there's been several skirmishes in some of these underground bases, most predominantly at Dulce, New Mexico, under the Archuleta Mesa, which is what's called a legacy base, which is a base that goes beyond our deep underground military bases and the tunneling that's been done in the last few decades. These are mostly, the entrances are natural cave entrances, but then they're burrowed out by the ET inhabitants. I'm reading Anthony Sanchez's book right now called UFO Highway, and he interviews a high colonel who was stationed at Dulce and speaks of not only the first altercation in 1940, but also the bigger altercation in 1979. And this is also what Philip Schneider spoke of, and actually was physically harmed. You can watch his videos on YouTube. Philip Schneider, similar to William Cooper, who was one of the first Navy intelligence whistleblowers, both of them were killed. And oftentimes when a whistleblower dies a very violent death, in the case of Philip Schneider, very mysterious death, I happen to think that they were probably telling the truth. Mm-hmm. And they were purposefully executed to shut him up. And this happens time and time again in the UFO whistleblower community. Carla Turner spoke about abductions. She was warned to stop. She didn't. She died of a very fast-acting cancer that took her life within a few weeks. There are other whistleblowers, one that I knew named Smith, and he was doing weather warfare, and he went up to speak on the show Conspiracy Theory and was talking about how HAARP and chemtrails may be working in conjunction, and one of the purposes may be to get into our heads. And this kind of goes back to this Project Bluebeam, and maybe some kind of hallucination in the sky is going to be followed with sounds in our head. And Jerry Smith died of a very mysterious virus within weeks of him being on Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura. And this is a friend of mine. We were canoe partners in Kempton, Illinois. So, when it touches close to home like that, it's a little bit frightening, but I think we just have to keep fighting the good fight and doing our best to get information out there, because we have a right to know.
Well, yeah, and in a single year, Philip Copeland's died of a fast-acting cancer, and so did Patrick Cook.
Yep.
Both of them just zap, and both of them very outspoken about the aliens and who they actually were and what they actually were. You go into amazing detail as to the different kinds of aliens. Most people just have heard about the Greys and maybe the Nordics. I think that Billy Meyer has been in communication with a Nordic or the Nordic people. Also, Reverend Michael Carter as well. I think he's also been in contact with a reptilian. But but aside from that, there are many, many, many other, just like there are Canadians and Americans and French people and Irish people. There appear to be as many different varieties of aliens that are here on the planet that most people don't hear about. They hear about the Greys and they hear about the reptilians, but they don't hear about all of the others. How come?
Well, because those are the ones that are the most hands-on. Those two that you mentioned, the reptilians and the Greys, are the ones who are interacting with humans the most and have their own agenda. So the other ones, and my understanding it's as high as 57 species, are actively either monitoring or hands-on extracting some of the reptilians from the planet in order to give humans a fair chance. Because we really don't have a fair chance against fourth dimensional entities when we don't even know what a fourth dimensional entity is, let alone how we're going to get rid of them, at least to the point where we can evolve on our own. So if we make mistakes, it'll be our own mistakes, not the mistakes that they want us to make. And so this kind of goes pretty deep into it, but this is based on not only David Wilcock speaks about the blue avians, and he now has a couple people who are whistleblowers out of the secret space program that are on his show on Gaim TV, and he writes about them, his books and so forth. But it also goes back to as far back as the Nazis were the first ones who interceded with extraterrestrials, the Arcturians, and others that they were actually channeling back in the Vril Society after World War I. There was this woman named Maria Orsic, and she was working with some other psychics in this old hunting lodge in southern Germany in the Alps. And they were able to start channeling the designs for not only extraterrestrial craft, but free energy devices and other things. And this was at a time when Germany looked like it was going to be a utopia. And then, of course, the Third Reich took over, and Adolf Hitler was a member of the Thule Society. Heinrich Himmler, deeply involved in the occult. They believed in ley lines all over the planet. They did seances. The SS were very much a secret society. He even had a castle called Wieselberg in Germany that is very steeped in the occult. And they were able to extract very high technology. Not only that, but they had their own downed craft in the Black Forest region of Germany, and Mussolini allowed the German scientists to go in there and extract a UFO that came down in Italy. So they've been backward engineering since at least the 1930s, probably much earlier. And they got to the point where they were creating very exotic craft towards the end of World War II. But when it was pretty clear that Germany was going to lose the war, a lot of these very exotic craft just disappeared. And some have presumed that they were taken in some of the larger U-boat submarines to a secret base in Antarctica called Base 332. And I was down in LA in January taping the new season 9 of Ancient Aliens. And one of the shows that I was speaking on was Antarctica, as well as Dr. Michael Sala, who was on after me that day. And we had an opportunity to have lunch together and talk about a lot of these deep exopolitics subjects. And it really is quite involved. It is quite a show right now that's happening here on Earth that is very interesting to other extraterrestrial and multi-dimensional species that are monitoring our planet. And let's just say your lifetime is very, very important to do the right thing, to help humanity, and to hopefully free our fellow humans from this bondage that we've been under for quite a long time.
Yeah, I know that you casually dropped a phrase that I'm sure people's ears perked up with. And before I go back to that, so Germany actually had a downed UFO at least a decade, if not more, before we did.
Correct.
So they were definitely ahead of us. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So
And they also made it to the moon before we did.
I don't doubt that at all.
There's still a base on the backside, the dark side of the moon, that's in the shape of a swastika.
Oh wow.
We'll learn about it someday.
Well, what gets you is that again, we have been held in the dark for so long.
Yes.
that you just it boggles the mind. But the term I'm coming back to is secret space program. The United States, according to what you've learned, we have a secret space program, but it's not. What I find fascinating is it's a secret space program. It's out there. It is around the planet, but it's not there to interfere with our petty wars. It's out there to protect us from using weapons of mass destruction, or to protect the planet from things coming in at us. Is that the correct understanding? Yeah,
it's called Solar Warden, and it is the Earthlings in conjunction with all of the developed nations. China's in on it, Russia's in on it. Of course, the U.S. is playing a leading role. The European Space Agency is in on it. And they are taking the task of controlling this solar system, or at least the orbits of the moon and Earth. We have bases on Mars as we speak. They've been there for decades. We have the ability to transport via what's called the jumper room, which is teleportation. Mm-hmm. And I've been on an interview with Andrew Basagio before. He was a child protege of some of these programs. If you want to know more, recommend you look into his story. I had dinner with Jacques Vallée and Richard Dolan in January. And Richard Dolan is the person who coined the phrase secret space program and the breakaway civilization of humans who have basically devoted themselves to living on some of these craft that are in our solar system and some of the bases on the moon and Mars. And I'm sure you've heard of the gentleman in the UK named Gary McKinnon, who was getting into the Johnson building number 8, the NASA building, where he was tipped off on Stephen Greer's disclosure in 2001 that Building 8 was doing airbrushing, that they were eliminating any sign of UFOs from some of the images that were being taken in outer space. And he came across them, but he also came across the ledgers where there were non-terrestrial officers. That he also found that there were these different spacecraft, cigar-shaped craft, our own discs, as well as the triangular craft. Now, you mentioned the Phoenix Lights before. Uh-huh. And I know some people in Arizona that saw it, and it was perfectly quiet. It just moved slowly across the sky. Of course, it went over Phoenix. It continued north. This is what a lot of people don't know. It got all the way up to Flagstaff, which is just north of Sedona, and it made a left turn. Where do you think it was going?
Area 51.
Right to Area 51.
Yeah.
So it's probably one of ours. And that's the question these days. When people see phenomenon or craft, is it ours or is it theirs? And most people say, by far the majority of sightings are our own secret space program crafts.
Wow. Now, these people in the space program, obviously they don't come home on leave.
No, they don't. And they basically, my friend David Hatcher-Childress, who we had a long conversation about it once, he told me that they're getting the soldiers for the breakaway civilization out of the submarine core. So they're coming from the Navy because they're already used to working in confined spaces and under pressurized environments. And they're looking for people that do not have children, that are not married, and hopefully come from like a broken family. So they really don't have many ties here on Earth. And then they're groomed specifically to accept this mission. And part of the terms of the mission is they could be gone for a very, very long time. And I mentioned David Wilcock is interviewing this guy named Corey Good. And he came from the secret space program. Indeed, he was out there for many years. And for some reason, they're allowing this guy to talk, because I think if they really wanted to shut him up, they probably could have. But disclosure is so imminent, it has to happen probably much sooner than later, that they're going to have to let these leaks go. And they can't keep killing people off.
No, that's tacky. Who was the last famous person that was in the jump room?
Well, apparently Barry Soetoro was in the jump room program, and of course he went on to take another name.
Yes, he did.
And he worked with Andrew Basiago in going to Mars. So apparently Barack Obama himself has been on the red planet. And his family, well, his mother, and through this Soetoro line in Indonesia, were already working hand in fist with the CIA. So he was already groomed from a very young age. And then once he went to Occidental College in Los Angeles, one of the most famous jump rooms was in El Segundo, California, which is right next to the LAX airport.
Uh-huh.
And the Hughes Aerospace building had a jump room that went up to Mars. And that's where young Barry Soetoro made his jump.
Now, is the jump room in any way similar to the Montauk Project?
Well, there are some similarities, and Peter Moon, who has done a lot of the Montauk books, he's a good friend of mine too. We've met several times. I'd love to get up there to Montauk and go tour the facility as much as we can. Well, Montauk was different. Montauk was more of an extension of MK Ultra, and they were more involved, some of the deeper programs, with mind control and with using some of these devices which are used on gray ET craft, such as the chair itself interacts with the body, as well as these headbands that they would put on. And what really stumped the scientists when they were first finding some of these craft is that they didn't have windows. They didn't have pilot windows. So it was always such a mystery how they were able to pilot these crafts. Well, it turns out that the suits they wear and the headbands on their head and their hands on these specific plates makes the pilot himself or herself part of the craft. They're bioengineered to be interfacing with the mind of the pilot themselves. And that's basically how these crafts are flown, through mental processes, through cognition. And this is what they were very interested in learning at Montauk, was how the mind was able to create matter, was able to create even some of these cryptozoology creatures. And one of the strangest stories that comes out of Montauk is someone was in what was called the Montauk Chair, and I do describe this in Future Esoteric. And he was able to envision these crypto creatures. And in fact, they did run around from the base, and I think a few even got into town, but for a very short period, and then they disappeared again. But they were able to find a way to interface the human mind with the material world and to create things. And this sounds very, very strange, and it probably is. But this is the story that I'm getting from Preston Nichols, who worked with Peter Moon, as well as Duncan Cameron, who was one of the two brothers who jumped off the ship during the Philadelphia experiment. And these guys showed up right there at Camp Hero, which is on the tip of Montauk, exactly 40 years later. So when they jumped off that ship, which was transitioning through space-time, like a tear in space-time, these two brothers showed up 40 years later. They thought they were still in 1943. And in fact, they were in 1983. And there were people there that knew they were coming, so they were intercepted right away and brought into Montauk. And then Duncan Cameron and his brother, who went by the name Al Bielek, they became whistleblowers. And if anybody finds this part of the story interesting, I'd recommend you listen to their multiple videos on YouTube that you can check these guys out.
It's kind of interesting that the Montauk Project and Project Pegasus were basically utilizing children.
Yes.
Is there some reason why children are more adaptable to this kind? And for those who don't know, Project Pegasus was a time travel and teleportation program.
Correct. And listening to some of Andrew Basaggio's videos could explain it much more in depth. But in the case of Andrew Basaggio and his involvement with Project Pegasus, he said they chose adolescent boys for a number of reasons. One, they were a little bit smaller so they could get through a little easier. And in the case of Andrew Basaggio, who went to see and hear the Gettysburg Address, and in fact, he claims that he is that boy wearing the great big shoes, because the one thing you have to do when you go through these jump rooms is you have to go through either just in your underwear, naked, or very little clothes, but certainly barefoot. And he transitioned. They knew exactly where to put him, just outside of where Lincoln was about to give the Gettysburg Address. He had no shoes on, so he had to find some adult shoes off of a dead soldier and walk into Gettysburg. And I just heard a recent interview with him, and he was saying, and I went and looked at the photo, that next to him you can kind of see the outline of a gray alien.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, and so he said that, yeah, there's all sorts of entities, and they're watching and sometimes even following him around when he would do these Project Pegasus experiments. And of course, his dad was also in on it, and his dad got Andrew into the program, and he did quite extraordinary things.
Didn't his dad also teleport as well, though, I thought?
Yes, he did, and they would do it together, and they would go from New Mexico to another base in Georgia quite regularly. It would just take 5 or 10 minutes to go that distance, and it's about that or a little bit longer to go to Mars. So teleportation is quite instantaneous, but not quite the snap of a finger. It does take a few minutes, apparently.
Well, isn't that what happened with the Philadelphia Project?
So the Philadelphia experiment, this was actually predicated on Tesla technology. In fact, Tesla was even there for the very first one. And it said that he pulled the plug on it and tried to sabotage it because he saw the direction it was going, and he wasn't satisfied that this was truly with benevolent motives, shall we say. And he wanted to basically take his technology out, but it wasn't possible, and they were able to rig it up. And so it was the second or third time that they had disappeared from the Philadelphia shipyard. The ship had reappeared in Norfolk, Virginia shipyard, and there was a ship there, and people saw it appear. And then it started coming back, and then somebody panicked on the Philadelphia side and tried to shut it down prematurely. And it was around that time that the two brothers jumped off the boat. And when the ship did reappear, there were people who were forged into the metal, screaming in pain. Some were dead. And they just didn't transition back in correctly. And it was very, very painful. So in many ways, the Philadelphia experiment was a huge success and a huge failure all at once, because they finally did figure out how to teletransport large objects like a ship and a crew, but with great costs and with great pain.
Weren't they initially just trying to cloak the ship?
That's correct. That was the whole idea of doing it. But then when they got, and this corresponds with how UFO craft fly, and I have a chapter in Future Esoteric called "To Fly a UFO," and basically when you get counter-rotating magnetic field with counter-rotating devices, usually in the case of ET craft, it could be magnets, but when it's something spinning around and it goes so fast, close to the speed of light, not only does it render the object less weight than it has, and there's plenty of videos where you can see actual levitation being done by scientists, frogs that are just hovering in the air, all the way up to bowling balls and all things small, but then they scaled it up. So when you meet these this qualification of getting two fields spinning very, very quickly, that the matter within it starts to basically transition up either into the next dimension or into light speed as popularized in Star Wars films. And basically, as far as piloting a craft, you become like a light being in these crafts. And this is why, I was reading in Nexus magazine a few years ago, this is why the secret space program has hit a brick wall. Because most of the pilots that they've trained to be in the breakaway civilization are coming out of the military. So they've been trained to shoot and kill and be violent against enemies. And so when they transition up to this condition where they're now in their light bodies, well, you have to be of a Buddha nature to go anywhere. So they're able to get up to that speed, but then they just get bounced right back because the pilots are not of an enlightened type of nature. They're soldiers. So this has been a big problem as far as our own secret space program going out and exploring the universe. My understanding is we're pretty much confined just to this solar system.
Well, yeah, and it's, I think what's fascinating to me is, and again, in my opinion, and it's only my opinion, and I don't have any expertise, it's just the way I figure it has to happen. My feeling is that these crafts are doing dimensional shifts. They're not really traveling in a straight line anywhere. They're shifting in dimensional shifting, and that's why when we see things like crop circles, I think something shifts in and creates whatever pattern it's going to create and then shifts out. And I do think that the crop circles, the ones that are real, I think they're trying to leave us almost pieces of a machine. So often there are symbols that look like they are pieces of a machine that if we could create and put together, they would help us to understand something that we're working on.
Yeah, I would agree. And I have a chapter on crop circles in Future Esoteric. What's more, when UFOs are sighted moving away very quickly, they make a 90-degree angle. Just make that quick turn, and then they disappear. So it's that 90-degree angle to shift into the next dimension.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about that, but what I am sure of is that when a crop circle is created, there is a smell of ozone in the air. The grass or whatever it is bent, not broken.
Yes.
And what's even cooler is that animals won't go into it. Animals won't eat it. It's almost as though it has been sterilized to the point that there's nothing nutritional there for even bugs to want to play with.
Right. And then if you were to walk into a crop circle right after it's freshly formed, compasses would just spin out of control.
Yeah.
Even if you fly over in an airplane, all the
Mhm.
dials will just stop functioning until you're out of that zone.
Yeah, and I've been very fortunate. There was one that was formed in Virginia, and I was able to go into it shortly after it was formed. And
Oh, wow.
you have the feeling as though, going back to Get Smart, which dates me, that there's a cone of silence there. There is a sense of peace and quiet and tranquility, and yes, nothing works. Cell phones don't work, watches don't work. It's an amazing feeling, and it's the same feeling. And the smell of ozone is amazing. Ozone is definitely there, and for those who don't know the smell of it, it's what you smell after a fresh rain or after lightning has been around. There's ozone in the air. It gives you the same feeling in the stone chambers that are here in New England that nobody knows, about where they came from. That same sense of peace and tranquility and quiet. And in a lot of the stone chambers as well, there are magnetic anomalies in their entranceways.
Yep. I did a DVD on the stone chambers, by the way. You can find it only on cccpublishing.com or Amazon. I have them listed, but they're called the Prehistoric Stone Chambers of New England. And I've been to Gungiwamp several times right there in Connecticut.
Well,
and,
I tell you
wow,
what,
you're absolutely right. They're just incredible.
Yeah,
monuments.
I'll watch your DVD if you watch mine.
You got it.
I did one too.
On the stone chambers?
On the stone chambers.
Oh,
yeah.
how cool.
I think I sent you the link on Skype. But the stone chambers are phenomenal, and just they have the stones that they're made out of they're dry construction.
Yep.
And there's no mortar or anything, and they're corbelled construction, and corbelled construction was last seen in this area 3,000 years ago from the Phoenicians. But the stones are so heavy that they can't, they're massive, and you can't say giants created them because they're small. But nobody knows why they're there and who made them, and it's interesting because it in the Stonehenge of in American Stonehenge, the largest stone there in that complex is bigger than the largest stone in the Great Pyramid. And almost all of the stones are of a quartz nature. They're granite, and they have a lot of quartz in them. So there are similarities all over the world, and I'm not saying aliens built these chambers, because I don't think they did, but I'm pretty sure that aliens or star people had to help with the Great Pyramid. And to my knowledge, the pyramids were never meant to be burial chambers.
No, they weren't.
So that, you kind of wonder, how did they get those stones from their quarries down the Nile to where they were? There had to be giants or extraterrestrial technology involved, very much like the technology that was used to do the Coral Castle down in Florida.
That's right. Auditive levitation. Just like a opera singer can shatter a wine glass with their voice, there are ways to render matter weightless using auditive sounds, vibrations, and frequencies. And the Tibetans were able to do it. I have a chapter in Future Esoteric called Secret Sciences about a Swedish scientist doctor who went on call to help a Tibetan Lama by request. And one day they took him out to this field, half circle of drummers, another were on horns, and another were chanters. So the whole monastery cleared out. They knew what to do. There was a rock right in the middle of that circle, and there was a cliff about a quarter mile away and up with some monks up on a ledge. And I've been studying this for quite a while, and I just had a big breakthrough when I heard another version of someone describing what this doctor had seen. And basically, when they had reached this cacophony of sound, all heads looked up, and right at that moment, the rock also went up into the air, and then it just went right over the cliff face and then came down. That's what's called auditive levitation. And I do believe that Ed Lee Scalian, who built the Coral Castle down in Florida, which, by the way, is the only modern megalithic monument in the world that's been built in the last 100 years, as well as all the megalithic monuments, some of which, like Baalbek in Lebanon, which I describe in my book, Sacred Places Around the World, has some stones that are still in the quarry, as well as some that are built into the foundation of Baalbek, Lebanon itself, that are so big that even the largest modern crane today cannot move them. Yet they not only moved them out of the quarry, but they fitted them perfectly above other stones. So there was some technology on this planet that was very high nature, and we're still grappling to understand how it was done.
Now, do you think we're grappling to understand how it was done, or we're grappling to remember how it was done? Because the one question I asked you beforehand was, are the ETs our creators or just another reflection of us from another time or dimension?
And that's a great question, and I have been thinking about it. And I would have to say it's all of the above and maybe even more. Because what I've come to understand, Barbara, is the universe is very complex as well as very populated, not just in this dense third-dimensional realm where we can only perceive a certain sound wave variance. We can only see in a certain way. You know, there's the infrared on one side and the ultraviolet on the other that we can't perceive, just in the same way that a dog can hear a dog whistle, but humans can't.
Right.
There is just so much out there that we can't perceive. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. In fact, it does exist, and it's our challenge to try to understand what that is.
I just feel that, you know, we only use one of our paired strands of DNA, and all the others have to be for something.
Yeah.
And I really feel that instead of looking for a hall of records, people should pay attention to the fact that I do believe we carry the hall of records with us, and it's accessing it that is the big thing. That the final frontier is not out there, but it's in there. Yep. And it's a matter of remembering it and then accessing it and then learning the philosophy, and then the biggest, most important part, walking the talk that creates it and manifests it.
That's right. Well said. Hear, hear. In service to others.
Exactly. I truly believe that when we actually all realize that we are one, and we're even one with the star people and all of those creatures out there, we all come from the same source.
Yep.
And that said, I want to thank you so much. This has been a fabulous show.
Thank you so much, Barbara, and we'll have to do it again sometime. We just scratched the surface.
Absolutely. Good night now.
Have a good night.
You too.
On the #1 listener-supported talk radio station.